Over the past 2 years, we've been fortunate to have short-term higher prices for oil, to hear about potential markets for natural gas, and quite a bit of news about new development on the North Slope that with potential markets for natural gas, et cetera, that could take some decades to develop. Somehow we've come to believe that these are the components of a sustainable future, but I'm not so sure that's true. So, Mr. President, what I'd like to talk to you is about that future. I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the present and recent past and a bit of old Alaska history. Perhaps in this way we might see our future a little bit more clearly. As some of you may know, I read a lot, perhaps too much. It makes me occasionally late to meetings, causes me to stay up too long, a little groggy in the morning, might upset my wife every now and then. But all of it sparks relationships and connections that I was unaware of. And then let me talk about a few of the facts that I've gleaned in this process that I think are worth hearing today in the light of some of the topics we've been discussing. The world, Mr. President, is moving away from fossil fuels. And in doing so, they inevitably must lead us to reconsider our future. One reason which we may no longer ignore for this dramatic shift is irrefutable. Proof that humans can do and have an impact on our global environment. For as long as records have been kept, over 100 years of them, Mr. President, 2017 was the third hottest year on record in the United States. Here at home, our last December was the hottest we have ever recorded, the hottest we've ever recorded. The warming event in the Bering Sea that led to the collapse of the cod fishery in 2016 was even cited by the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society as one of the first concrete and scientifically measurable examples that the warming we've seen is caused by human-generated climate change. Climate change is at our front door. We know it's at our front door because some of our villages suffer from it. We know it's at our front door because of that loss of our own resource, our fishing resource. And we know it's here because of those temperature changes. And what else do we know? In December of 2015, at the Paris conference, we saw nation after nation, entrepreneur after entrepreneur, billionaire after billionaire, people who are not known for investing in the past, switching their investment away from fossil fuels and to renewable resources. Last month, Ford Motor Company announced $11 billion investment in all-electric cars within the next decade. All-electric cars within the next decade. The CEO of Shell even announced that he bought an electric car last fall. The leaders of BP, other oil giants, Shell, have all said the price of oil is going to stay below $70 a barrel, not just for a decade or two, but for the long term, and that's based on two reasons. The first reason is partly due to the recovery and fracking boom across the United States. It's lowered the cost and time for extraction for oil and oversupplied the market. It can be supplied fast or short on a regular basis, Mr. President. Those easily accessible shale deposits in North America and the oversupply they are creating on the world market put our future at risk. It's also partially due to the steadily decreasing cost of energy storage and alternative and renewable energy throughout the globe. Some of these same facts were reinforced just last month when Rick Ruggiero was up here. This is a real issue that we are frankly, in all of our debates and all of our actions here in this building in the Capitol, ignoring. We are expecting that oil and gas market is static, that what has been a world that uses non-renewables, the internal combustion engine, and the industry that only suffers the usual price fluctuations of the market is the norm. But today I'm suggesting to you that it isn't the norm any longer. We as a planet are in the midst of a dramatic change. What is happening around the world? Sometimes we lose track of that in this building. We forget what's happening around the world. By the last quarter of 2016, over 50% of the United Kingdom's energy was produced by renewable energy. 77% in Scotland alone, and they closed their last coal-fired plant. Members of the German government just passed a resolution asking that the European Union discontinue accepting the internal combustion engine by 2030, less than 12 years from now, Mr. President. In September 2016, China indicated their intention to ban the internal combustion engines in what is the fastest growing economy in the world. With our federal administration backing away from renewables, China has changed their energy approach on a dime, something that their absolute control of their command economy allows them to do. China is now happy to emerge as a world leader in efforts to attack carbon emissions and has reversed some of the direction, its own direction of the past decade, and the world is following their lead. This past January, just a month ago, China canceled more than 100 coal-fired plants, including some that they were just building, that were still under construction. And as reported by the China National Renewable Energy Center, they're aiming for 25% renewable energy consumption by 2020, while some people are estimating they've already exceeded that number. Across the world, this is true. According to the Renewables 2017 report, quote, as a whole, renewables represented nearly 2/3 of new electricity capacity additions last year, far outshining coal and natural gas growth. For the very first time, solar PV additions grew faster than any other resource surpassing coal growth. Renewable growth, as prices for these technologies fall and long-term energy battery storage capacity increases, is anticipated to leapfrog fossil fuel use in the third world nations in particular, much as the cell phone bypassed hardline telecommunication in those nations as prices fell for the product. So why am I telling you all this today, Mr. President? Why is this important? Because we're at a crossroads that is transformational. And while we debate the budget and revenue options and what a sustainable plan looks like, we need to keep in mind these trends and what the future looks like. And we don't have a great record here of looking into the future. Late last year, my friend from the senator from District C, knowing my love of history and old books, loaned me a copy of one of his favorite books, which I dutifully read. Charlie Brower's 50 Years Below Zero. The story of Charlie Brower, a man from the East Coast who ended up following the whaling industry to Alaska, making his life here, is a fascinating story. His descendants and so many others of those who also came up here following whales remain part of our Alaska history and our heritage. Names like Brower and Hobson and Levitt, all connected to that time and connected to our time now. It's a compelling story of adventure and perseverance, but in it is also a lesson. As I read the book, I realized that this was more than a story about Alaska. It was a story about change and how dramatically things can change. Over a century ago, after gold fever had died down, a good part of Alaska's boom economy was dominated by extraction of whale oil for lighting and whalebone for corsets. It was a lucrative market that lured Brower and his associates north. No one could have imagined it would change. Each season up and then down and back again, waiting for shipments, replacements, and the parade of ships, until dramatically one day, one year, they just stopped coming. Within 10 years of his arrival, the market for whale oil and corsets simply vanished. Times had changed. There were signals, sure, but they were ignored while people tried to carry on as though things would always be the same. Like the end of carriages as the automobile industry took off, like investments in dirigibles as aviation changed and the airplane truly took flight. Wealth in Alaska built on whale oil and bone disappeared entirely, and we were not prepared. We're nearing that same horizon, and we're not preparing for it. Instead, we harbor dreams of gas lines and higher prices and growing markets that the evidence says will not be there in a decade's time. What are we doing to plan for a future where the only ones who might want our oil can't even afford it? Our myopic dependence disturbs me. Mr. President, we've made talking about an alternative vision some kind of third rail in our political debate, as though talking about something other than oil and gas is almost criminal. It shouldn't be. To paraphrase Charlie Brower, one day the industry was just gone. That's the future we face. Today, oil meets 36% of U.S. energy demand, with 71% of that directed to fuels used in transportation, gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. Another 24% is used in industry and manufacturing, Almost 5% is used in the commercial and residential sectors, and less than 1% is used to generate electricity. Experts see an end to fossil fuels for transportation. The greatest minds, the greatest investors are all betting on a future without these fuels. So why aren't we? Today we have the opportunity to say we are ready to be part of the future, of a new vision. Mr. President, let's make that choice now. I proposed 2 bills this week that would start us on that journey. One follows the lead of other nations and states that set renewable energy targets for state agencies to ensure we move into the world fully prepared and ready to take advantage of that technology. The other sets us on a cost-neutral path to retrofitting our own state buildings for more efficient technology and energy use that could reap millions in benefit. But it's not about that legislation or any legislation. It's about how we invest our resources today, Mr. President, how we build our workforce today, how we revolutionize our communities to become energy self-sufficient and leaders in this new technology, because we can do that. In the 70s, Alaska became the experimental testing ground for telecommunications technology. We revolutionized telecommunications here, Mr. President. Our adverse conditions, remote challenges, and rural populations posed a challenge to a young but growing telecommunications industry, and we revolutionized it. State-of-the-art technology was developed here, and we led the nation in those efforts. On the North Slope, when it came to fracking technology and digging in and finding better ways to produce energy, we did that too. In a way, it's come to bite us a little bit in the back because it's helped develop the fracking industry around the country, but we did that here. We led. We can do it again with alternative energy. We can facilitate a partnership between local communities and private industry and alternative energy leaders. We could break the stranglehold fossil fuels have on our rural communities and our urban communities. That high cost of energy, which drives teachers out of schools, residents out of villages, and tears families apart, contributing to our high social capital costs in this state. Our migration between urban and rural areas drives social disintegration and fosters instability and homelessness in our urban areas. Instead, by pioneering energy storage, new forms of renewables like heat transfer, which heats the Seward Life Center today, small hydro, solar, wind, biomass, and other renewable forms of energy, and building alliances with private firms seeking to test long-term battery storage technology in the most difficult conditions in the world, we could transform energy and our workforce in Alaska. Internationally, it's predicted that the shift to renewables will take less than a generation. 1/3 of the time it took to shift from wood to coal, 1/3 of the time it took to shift from coal to oil. It's already happening. We need to be in the forefront of that change, not just because we can be, but because we must be. Or we'll be left behind still hoping that our wealth in the ground will carry the day, even when we know it will not. That's why it's so important to invest in our university, in science and math, and education, and critical that we use our leverage through ADA, the Energy Authority, and other funds we manage, rather than bleeding them down until our window of opportunity is lost and our ability to shift our priorities and reimagine our future is gone. If we do it right, we could be the leader in this climate change technology. We could encourage the investment of these pioneering companies in testing their products here. We could be systemically developing our students through the university and our school systems to be a workforce that leads the field in these emerging technologies designed to combat our warming climate. We've led before in telecommunications and oil. We can do it again in renewables and climate change technology. We've always been the last frontier, Mr. President, but there is a path now for us to become a new frontier. All of these discussions, everything we do, determines how close we come to a path to that new frontier. Or maybe we'll find ourselves 20 years from now in our equivalent of Charlie Brower's whaling station, watching the last ship leave and wondering if they'll return or if the world has passed us by. Mr. President, we are in the midst of a winter of great technological change. Its ice is freezing around us, the hull is cracking, and the pressure is great. How do we survive? Shall we hunker down assuming that things will not change? That what we have known will bear us through again, or will we seize the opportunity to carve a new direction? Sometimes we can only realize the opportunity of our future by glancing to those words from the past and understanding their lessons. We are at that time. Now is that moment. What path will we choose? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator.